Does anybody remember the 2003 2D animated film Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, starring Brad Pitt as that classic folk hero Sinbad, the scraggly sea dog? No? Well, it's pretty much only known now as an all time financial disaster. One so bad it basically nearly ruined the Dreamworks company and caused a dramatic restructuring of their business. And it was basically the final nail in the coffin for traditional hand drawn 2D animation for Jeffrey Katzenberg, the studio exec who was running DreamWorks and had previously basically led the Disney Renaissance. Whenever I talk about this subject, I recommend the book The Men Who Would Be King by Nicole Laporte. It's about the rise and fall of DreamWorks. It's a fascinating story, and if you're interested, you should read the book. I'm really fascinated whenever movie studios try to make animated movies or when a new animated studio pops up, and I like looking at these bizarre, forgotten animated movies. So expect me in the future to make videos about movies like Cats Don't Dance and Rockadoodle and Quest for Camelot. Those videos will come. But Sinbad, the main character in the story, as always, is Jeffrey Katzenberg. And when he was the head of Disney Animation in the early 90s, he heard a pitch from the Aladdin co-writers Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio for an animated movie based on another Arabian Nights tale, Sinbad. And their pitch was that this would be a more adult-oriented romantic comedy, a screwball comedy, kind of like a Howard Hawks throwback classic comedy with the rat-a-tat-tat between the two, the male and the female lead. And but the twist would be ultimately the hero of this movie doesn't get the girl. This project didn't move forward at Disney, but years later, once Katzenberg had started up DreamWorks, he revived the project and he invited Ross and Elliott back aboard to help with it. So from The Men Who Would Be King by Nicole Laporte. Quote, Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, due out in July of 2003, was Jeffrey Katzenberg's most extreme experiment yet. He called the film our attempt to do an homage to Steven Spielberg. It is meant to be Indiana Jones in animation. The traditionally animated project, which followed the adventures of the seafaring mischief maker from the Arabian Nights tales, had no musical numbers and no animals that talked. Sinbad's sidekick, a dog named Spike, did nothing more than drool a bit. As for Sinbad, he was no imaginatively shaped Shrek. He was all chiseled jawline and perfect pecs, much like the man who provided the voice, Brad Pitt. End quote. Ross and Elliott, they wanted to retool the project to make it less of a screwball comedy and now more of a prestige, serious adventure movie. I get the sense that they wanted it to feel like The Prince of Egypt, which came out in 98. And I just watched that movie. I made a video about it. I think it's very impressive in how seriously it takes its story and how seriously it treats the audience. So it seems like that was the plan for Sinbad. And the studio hired John Logan, who had just won an Oscar for writing Gladiator, to write the script for the movie. And he had never written an animated film or a family film before. But basically, as the project is in development, the studio starts to get cold feet. Because The Prince of Egypt and after that, The Road to El Dorado, they were at best minor successes. The studio's breakout hit in this period was, of course, Shrek, which is just an entirely different kind of movie. Not only was it an extremely goofy comedy, it was computer animated. It was 3D animated. And Katzenberg was growing less and less attached to keeping hand-drawn traditional 2D animation alive. Moreover, Disney, during this time, released two back-to-back boys' adventure films that disappointed at the box office. Atlantis, the Lost Empire in 2000 and Treasure Planet in 2002. And so this only increased DreamWorks' fears for Sinbad. And so the movie keeps getting retooled. Like, what if we turn it into a more of a family comedy? Or what if we make it goofier? What if we make it sillier? Will people like it more? It goes from drama to comedy to adventure to screwball, kid-friendly. Even so, the movie gets produced with a budget of $60 million, a big budget. And it has really talented animators working on it. The directors of the movie were Tim Johnson and Patrick Gilmore, and they had both made good stuff before. So I watched the movie. Is the movie like The Prince of Egypt? Is it a secret masterpiece? No, it is not. It is a movie that you can tell right away has been futzed with. The tone changes constantly throughout. There is no single tone that gets a commitment. Like, the movie will flirt with being a comedy, with being a lighthearted adventure movie, with being a serious movie about like class politics, but just none of them, it doesn't commit to any of them, and none of them work. You don't believe any of them. And Brad Pitt, I mean, this is one of the most checked out voiceover performances I think I have ever heard. But the animation also does him no favors. Like, the character animation in terms of design is pretty solid, but there's no personality to any of it, especially to Sinbad. He does not pop at all. He has no charisma, both in the way he looks and moves and the way he speaks via Brad Pitt. And yet the movie, like Poochie, whenever Sinbad's not on screen, everybody's asking, where's Sinbad? Where's Sinbad? We need Sinbad. You might notice about this story. Sinbad is a very famous Arabian Nights tale. It is a tale from the Arab world. It is about an Arab named Sinbad, but this movie doesn't seem like it has any Arabic imagery or people or references in it at all. And that's because they took all of that out. They changed it. They made it sort of non-specific Mediterranean, and the antagonist is a Greek goddess. So they basically, they literally whitewashed Sinbad to de-Arabize it. And I couldn't find any reporting about when this change was made or why it might have been made, but it's not a big leap to remember that this was made after 9/11 as the United States was preparing to invade and occupy and destroy an Arab country. So this is just a dreadful move, both ethically, and I think it's just a bad storytelling move. I think people loved Aladdin. People want to see this kind of imagery, and they just made it so bland and non-specific. But Katzenberg kept changing the script for the movie, but also the animation style. He wanted it to be more cartoony. And let me tell you, from a visual standpoint, this thing is so all over the place. There are some impressive sequences. There's some solid hand-drawn animation, but there's also so much CGI augmentation, which there also was in The Prince of Egypt, but that to a much lesser degree, and it was much more impressive then. Here, it's just like the technology just wasn't there in 2003, and it couldn't do things like render water, and water's really hard to animate. But if you look at the way the CGI water in this looks, and then jump forward in time 13 years to Moana, and it's like it's night and day. We came a very long way. And there's just also so much awkward compositing of hand-drawn and CGI elements. Like there's this CGI Kraken at the beginning of the movie, and it really looks like the episode of South Park where the kids from South Park meet Cthulhu. I was actually thinking a lot about South Park during this movie because Sinbad the movie will have things where like one object in the frame is CGI and the rest is hand drawn, and they're just doing this to save money. Like there's a scene where somebody's trying to take a screw out of a door hinge, and the screw is CGI, and it just stands out so badly. And it reminds me of whenever South Park does things like composite in a photograph with animation, not as a joke, but as a shortcut. Like you'll notice on South Park, whenever the characters use a microphone, the microphone ball is a photograph, but the rest of the microphone, the part that you hold, that's animated. And these might sound like nitpicks, but there's just so little to grab onto with this movie. The characters are anonymous. They're not funny. They're not fun. The story is just lorem ipsum, filler, adventure, crap. The comedy's awkward. There's two really great looking sequences. It's a part with a ship graveyard, and then there's a part at the end of the movie where basically they sail off the edge of the world. Really imaginative and cool, but that's like the only two things that I think make this movie worth watching at all. This movie was a zombie before it was even released. The studio lost confidence in it, and the American movie industry was moving on from hand-drawn animation. Finding Nemo was released very soon after this movie and became one of the biggest movies ever. And a week after Sinbad opens, Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one, opens, and whatever appetite there was in audiences to see an adventure movie on the high seas was absorbed by that. This movie made $6 million in its opening weekend. It would ultimately lose $125 million for the studio, and the studio was already struggling. Dreamworks, its grand plans were sputtering. When the studio started in 1994, the idea was this would be a company that doesn't just make movies, doesn't just make TV, but it's going to make video games, themed experiences, and music. And it like shed each of these over time as it realized it can't make money these ways. And when Sinbad failed, that's when they finally gave up on music and had to sell off their entire music division. And then within a few years after this, Dreamworks as an independent company stopped existing entirely. I sure do wish this movie were more interesting. It were more interesting as something other than just a curiosity or a historical footnote. I'm sure there are people who feel nostalgic about it. But as somebody who didn't have any nostalgia about it, coming to it fresh, there was just nothing for me to grab onto. But let me know if you feel differently. I'd like to hear from you. And if you like hearing people talk about movies that either we or you feel nostalgic about, listen to my podcast, Load Bearing Beams. It comes out every Friday.